of study.
Yeah, I wasn't, it's not so much that I was pushed around. Some of it was also just observing how other people were being treated. I
Yeah,
have this idea that I talk about in the book that, people will always wear the mask of being agreeable and friendly. Even the most psychotic boss will always know how to be somewhat charming and present themselves. But you look at how they treat other people when you're not observing them behind closed doors, and that's when some of their ugly behavior will come out. They kind of hide it very well from the public. So a lot of it was observing how other people were mistreated. And so when I worked in Hollywood, in some industries, I have to say some industries are a lot worse than others. So when you're working at that factory job that you're mentioning, people will tend to be kind of united around a single purpose. There won't be much politicking going on.
Yeah,
but in an environment where Hollywood, so much of it is money and ego, etc. The level
and the desire for fame, and that's going to attract a disproportionate number. So it's the people that are more likely to be the way that you describe are high in extroversion, especially assertiveness, and they're low in agreeableness. That's kind of the personality disorder axis: high in extroverted assertiveness and low in agreeableness, especially compassion. And then if you add unconscientiousness to that, you got someone who's bordering on psychopathic.
Right.
And they could still be high in openness. They could still be creative and intelligent, but they'd be manipulative as hell and callous.
Yeah.
And I would say that another thing I was going to ask you is, because you worked in Hollywood, and that is a place that invites people who want to make a display of themselves, let's say, and there's some utility in that, right? We want people to be actors. We want them to be enthusiastic and entertaining.
Yes.
But it's so. Is it possible that a lot of this you saw was a consequence of the form of industry that you were involved in, especially in Hollywood?
Well, definitely. But after the book came out, my first book, The 48 Laws, it became hugely popular in the hip-hop world among musicians, which is why I ended up doing a book with 50 Cent. And I found out that the music industry was even worse than Hollywood. And then I was in Washington for a book tour for The 48 Laws, and this woman came running up to me who worked at Voice of America, and she was saying, "You have no idea how the 48 Laws of Power exactly describe the environment I'm in." And then I was at a conference with people who were in nonprofits in San Diego, and this woman was saying, "Boy, you describe the nonprofit work politically. It is so perfectly. It is so political. It's so much about ego." So
it's horrible. That's true of the nonprofit world, Well, I mean, that might have to do with that moral posturing, eh?
Well, the way I look at it is, you had a place like the Soviet Union where your degree of power wasn't based on any kind of statistics. It wasn't that you performed better than others. It wasn't that your economic branch was outperforming others and therefore you were elevated to a higher position. It was pure politicking. It was pure manipulation. How close could you get to the
dominance, hierarchy maneuvering.
Yeah. So when you have like a nonprofit world where it's not based on money or results, it's more on you get very political environments like that where there's no kind of quantification of what one is doing superior work than others.
Yeah, I talked to Adrian Wooldridge, and he wrote some books on the history of meritocracy. They're very, very interesting. He writes for The Economist, and that the idea of meritocracy is under assault now. I think the idea of merit per se is under assault. And what Wooldridge has done was look at how societies were structured in the absence of the meritocratic ethos. And so that's in the absence of a belief that there is such a thing as productive competence. And he talked about nepotism, which, by the way, psychopaths practice nepotism. They're not only selfish, they do differentially benefit their immediate kin. And hereditary aristocracy. So if you don't have meritocracy, and if your hierarchies aren't predicated on competence, you don't get a non-competitive utopia.
No, not at all.
Exactly. You get nepotism and this political infighting, and that is, it's no wonder that affected you, because that's absolutely toxic. It's just sickening, and it does produce a situation where the worst people torture the people who are competent for their competence. It's really ugly.
Yeah, and when I came out of university, I went to University of Wisconsin, and I had my degree in classics and literature, etc. I wasn't expecting this. I expected that the harder you tried, the better the work that you produced, the more you tried to, get results. That's what mattered, right? And then to suddenly be blindsided this because nobody in our culture tells young people that this is what the world is going to be like. And that's sort of a lot of where this book came out of. I wrote it when I was 38, 39, so I was already a bit older. But your parents don't prepare you for this. Schools don't prepare you for this. The university certainly doesn't prepare you for it. In fact, it leads you to believe the opposite. And so you enter the work world, and if you're entering a place more like what we're describing here, not like what you were describing, some of the jobs you had, you're blindsided. You had no preparation for it. Nothing prepared you for it, and you don't know how to react.
Well, if you're naive in that manner, two things happen.
And I was naive, yeah.
One is that you're much more likely to be exploited. That definitely happens. The other thing is you're much more likely to be traumatized because trauma sort of occurs in proportion to how much of your belief it demolishes. And so if you have a too positive and too naive view of the world, and especially if you encounter someone malevolent, they can really do you in psychologically.
Yeah.
And they often will too, because, well, they have their reasons. And so.
Yeah. Yeah, I can remember I had a job in journalism, and I wrote this article about Italy, and I thought it was a great article. And then the editor brought me in for lunch, and he was like having his second or third martini, and he started to tell me that, Robert, you're never going to be a writer. You don't have the discipline for it. You're just too wild. You don't communicate to the reader, etc. You need to get out of this business. It's not for you. It was very painful. And then in looking back at it, I think he had set me up for this. I think that he had kind of commissioned this article knowing that it was going to have some problems with it, etc. And that he was deliberately setting me up in this situation so that and I think a lot of it came from envy.
Envy is a bad one, and envy and resentment, man, those are corrosive. They're soul and culture destroying emotions. When I worked with my clients, we talked a lot about resentment, a lot. And I had kind of an axiom, which is, well, if you're resentful, there's only one of two things going on. One is you're whiny and neurotic, and it's time to grow the hell up and take some responsibility.
Right.
And so you've got to ask yourself that. And the second is, someone is taking advantage of you, and you have something to say or do that you're not saying or doing. And so we try to sort out which of those it was, and then if it was that they had something to say or do to stand up for themselves, for example,
Certainly.
then we just strategize like mad. So I had one client, for example, I really liked her. She was smart, man, very, very, very competent, honest, hardworking, conscientious, diligent, attractive lawyer.
Yeah.
And she'd moved firms, and those firms can be pretty cutthroat. They're full of prosecutors. What do you expect, right?
Right.
And one guy, when she went into the firm, basically swiped her biggest client through a series of manipulative actions.
Right.
And, kind of lulled her into a false sense of security, sort of started to cooperate with her, and then shunted her out. And then when she started to complain about it, he started distributing rumors that she had mental health issues, and it was absolutely awful. So we spent about 6 months strategizing how to deal with him. And so it was successful, and then I love doing that sort of thing. It was such fun helping people who are being
I do.
Yeah.
I do the same thing as well. Yeah, sorry.
So why do you think this was so popular? Or you said the music industry was particularly pathological. At least this is the reports you got. So why do you think that is? Do you have any theories about that? And then why do you think your books got to be so popular among rappers, say?
Why do you think the music industry is the way it is?
I mean, do you think there's something specific about that industry that lends itself to that kind of corruption?
Yes, and I've had a lot of people give me the same kind of feedback. There's a lot of money around, right? Huge amounts of money around, and people are producers of music are they have a very exploitative kind of model of business, which is they seduce a first-time artist with a lot of money.
이렇게
But the
먹어
contract is that
이거.
eventually they own all of the work, etc. So it was a very exploitive business model, particularly for African American musicians who were historically very exploited. And so it's like Hollywood, where so much of it is about pleasing people and having the right demeanor. So 50 Cent, who I wrote the book with, he said, he dealt crack on the streets of Southside Queens. He was a hustler at the age of 9. He saw everything, but nothing prepared him for the kind of Machiavellian games that music industry people would
Right,
play.
you want to take a straightforward criminal over a psychopathic manipulator any day.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and you talked about money. Like, I'd rather deal with someone greedy, like honestly greedy, than someone manipulative, underground politicker.
Right.
Because at least with the greed, well, you can negotiate with someone like that. You know what they want. They're kind of unidimensional. And you might have your moral qualms about it, but I think that's partly why I'm an admirer of capitalism. It's like greed is not the worst of the vices by any stretch of the imagination.
No, I agree with you on that. And so, why are my books popular? I think there's a combination of things. First of all, I'm giving people something that's not out there, a kind of a realism. And I think a lot of people are inwardly very tired and very sick of all the kind of coddling that goes on with readers and in our culture. But the people are trying to, perpetuate this myth that it's all about cooperation and getting along, and that business is kind of this world where people are all on the same page trying to create the best product possible, etc. And they kind of have the same kind of illusions that I had. And so the harshness of the book that first kind of shocked you sort of excites people. It appeals to their shadow side, if you will, and that shadow side is very much repressed in our culture. And I think artists and writers and people who produce work that kind of vents some of that shadow, some of those darker emotions that people have, it has a very attracting pull on them. So I think that's part of the reason, because there's a kind of a notoriety around the book, and people almost feel like it's something naughty when they have it. And so I think that's part of the appeal of it.
Starting a business can be tough, but thanks to Shopify, running your online storefront is easier than ever. Shopify is the global platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your online shop,
Crecer, boludo.
did we just hit 1 million orders stage? Shopify is here to help you grow. Our marketing team uses Shopify every day to sell our merchandise, and we love how easy it is to add more items, ship products, and track conversions. With Shopify, customize your online store to your style with flexible templates and powerful tools, alongside an endless list of integrations and third-party apps like on-demand printing, accounting, and chatbots. Shopify helps you turn browsers into buyers with the internet's best converting checkout, up to 36% better compared to other leading e-commerce platforms. No matter how big you want to grow, Shopify gives you everything you need to take control and take your business to the next level. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/JBP, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/JBP now to grow your business no matter what stage you're in. That's shopify.com/JBP.
A few decades ago, private citizens used to be largely that, private. So what's changed? The answer, the internet. Think about everything you've browsed, searched for, watched, or tweeted. Now imagine all that data being crawled, collected, and aggregated by data brokers into a permanent public record. Your record. Having a private life exposed for others to see was once something only celebrities worried about. But in an era where everything is online, everyone's a public figure. To keep my data private, when I go online, I turn to ExpressVPN. You know what's one of the easiest ways for data brokers to track everything across all my
Stricken circumstances in northern Alberta, really on a frontier piece of land, like it had only been broken 50 years before by his father, who was a longshoreman and an ex-military guy. Good guy, his father. But this guy grew up, and he is tough. He worked in lead smelters, and he wandered around Western Canada. He was my roommate when I went to college, and is still a good friend of mine. And he ended up working with, delinquents. He went into social work, oddly enough, and he ended up working with some of the worst delinquents in Canada. And he's a really good guy, and he likes to help people get better. But he isn't naive at all. And then part of the reason that he was good at working with the delinquents was because there were no tricks they could get up to that he couldn't see right through. And that was partly because he had a real integrated shadow. I mean, I'll give you an example of him. So one day, I was living in this town called Grand Prairie, and it was at the height of the oil boom, and so it was a rough town, and there were lots of rough bars in it, lots of young men in there with plenty of money and they come in for 3 days after being out in -40 weather, working on the oil rigs, and they were ready to party, man. And we had a party one night in this kind of frat house that I went to college in, and way too many people showed up, and some of them were real troublemakers. And we had a table that was pretty full of beer bottles and vodka bottles and so forth, and one guy just went over and tore the leg off and knocked the table over, and then a bunch of us got together and chased them all out. And this friend of mine, he said, oh, they'll be back. And so he went upstairs and he put on some steel-toed cowboy boots. It was just like a bloody Western. He came marching down the stairs. And just as he entered the living room, there was a big knock on the front door. It was these hooligans coming back to cause grief. And he just didn't break stride. He opened the door. He pulled open the door, and there was a guy standing there ready to fight, and he kicked him underneath the chin with his steel-toed cowboy boot, knocked him right over the front porch, and the battle was on. But that was exactly what he was like,
Right.
And his shadow was integrated. He was a great roommate. He reciprocated everything. I always knew if I bought groceries one week, he'd buy it the next. Like, he was a straight shooter. You could trust him. But he was not naive, man. And that made him able to deal with delinquents and to help them. So that's part of that integration of that shadow.
Yeah, I go very deeply into the shadow in a chapter in my last book, The Laws of Human Nature. And I try and talk about how one integrates the shadow, because it's not an easy answer for that. People are kind of perplexed. Well, I have this dark side, and I explain a lot of where it comes from and how a lot of your aggressive impulses, like the room of 2-year-olds that you were talking about, you have that as well. I'm talking to the people that are my readers. You have that aggressiveness when you were young, and it got socialized out of you, and then it got repressed, and it's like a lost self that lives inside of you and is screaming to come out. How do you integrate it? And so the main thing is you have to be aware that you have this shadow side. You can't run away from it. You have to acknowledge that it exists. You almost have to embrace it in a way.
A good parent too does everything he or she can not to repress that. Like, what you want to do with children is you want them to be forceful. You want them to have some power.
Exactly.
You want them to integrate that capacity for aggression into, well, let's say, lucid conversation. You want them to be able to stand up for themselves in family discussions. If you just punish them for being aggressive, let's say for talking back or something like that, you don't guide that into more sophisticated development. You see this in schools too now. When my kids went to school, this was so dumb. We had a rule in our house, which was, you don't have to follow stupid rules.
That's a good rule.
But if you get caught, you have to put up with consequences.
Right.
So one rule was, the school had, not only could you not throw snowballs, you couldn't make them. And so they were trying to, exactly, you should shake your head, that's for sure. It's like, because their answer, and this was all politically correct nonsense, non-competitive games. We're only going to play non-competitive games.
Yeah.
It's like, first of all, I studied Piaget.
Yeah.
A hockey game is not competitive exactly, because in a hockey game, no one brings a basketball. Everybody plays hockey. So that's cooperation. And then on the team, you have to cooperate. And like, if you're the star but you never pass, you're just a dumb son of a bitch. You're not the star. And so there's tremendous amount of cooperation in all those competitive games. They're integrated. And this idea that, you make children better by not allowing them to be competitive.
It's disgusting.
It is. That's the Freudian devouring mother, right? That's, everyone's safe and no one's going to ever hurt anyone. And
that's kind of where a lot of young people are, they enter the world where they've been coddled, where they think that there are no winners, that everyone is, it's just win-win situations. And that's where they get really shocked by the realities of the world. So all this coddling and this idea that there doesn't have to be a winner. We don't have to get prizes for first place. Everybody should get a prize. All you're doing is setting your children up for massive, shocks when they enter the world and they see that it's not like that.
Yeah, and then they get disillusioned and depressed, or traumatized by it. I mean, when my son's hockey team in his school, they won the city championship, which was a big deal, and the school was pretty happy about that. To his credit, so was the coach, but the principal, who was this authoritarian empath, she was an awful person, I thought.
Authoritarian
empath.
That's
Empath.
interesting.
Yeah, well, yeah. She used
like
moral
that.
virtue as a club.
Yeah.
Oh, and it was, yeah, well, there's plenty of those people around.
Yeah,
She said, well, really, today we're all winners. And the coach had exactly. No, it is sickening because my son was just appalled by it, but the coach had enough guts. He said, no, the hockey team won. And it's not like the kids in the school were jealous. Some of them were, obviously, but most of them were really happy, like you are when your sports team wins, and most people are generous enough so that they're able to celebrate someone else's victory without. And that's the same. I saw this with birthday parties. I just bloody well hated this. It's like, well, every child gets a gift bag. It's like, no, they have their damn birthday. Every child doesn't need a damn gift bag. And this same naive, treacly, and it's authoritarian too, because it imposes this kind of view of the world. It's like, no, it's this kid's day to be special. That's why we're celebrating this kid. The rest of them, if they can't take that, it's like there's something wrong with the way that they've been treated and attended to.
Well, a lot of my books, I've tried to remove the kind of taboo or the negative associations we have with the word like power or with the word ambition. I try and say ambition is a good thing. It means that you believe in yourself, you have some self-love, and you believe you're worth something, and you want to go out and achieve and create something worthwhile for other people. So ambition is a positive thing. But so many people are just kind of embarrassed about being a human being, embarrassed about our primate nature, embarrassed about our own aggressive impulses.
This is partly why boys are failing in our schools now at a disproportionate rate, and I see there's an assault of the sort that you're describing on the better part of striving masculinity. And, I had a friend who killed himself because he identified his ambition with the patriarchal force that's devouring the environment, let's say, and that's the cause of historical horror. And you might say, well, no one takes that onto themselves to that degree, and you can say that, but that you just don't know what the hell you're talking about. People take that onto themselves all the time, and then they start to identify the best part of them that strives forward with the destructive impulses of humanity, and they're so ashamed because they can't do anything good then. But in principle, he tried to be as inoffensive and harmless in every possible way as he possibly could, and it just sucked all the life out of him.
You end up turning that aggressive energy on yourself is what ends up happening, and that's maybe leads to suicide, the ultimate kind of self-aggression. I know that I personally have, as I said, I definitely have a shadow side. I'm very aggressive and extremely competitive, and I have a lot of anger. So a lot of those experiences in my youth made me very angry. But the way I kind of integrated my shadow, I'm not saying this is a model, but the way I integrated it was through my books. I kind of, that anger kind of seeps through the material that I write, and I find I can only write when I have that kind of anger. But I don't rant, I don't yell and kind of put people down. I kind of channel it into something productive and something creative. And so to me,
I definitely do that when I'm lecturing. And people have commented, some of the people who've criticized me that I'm an angry person, and which isn't true, but it's definitely that anger, that capacity for anger definitely is something that gives you force, and it can push, and anger definitely. So psychophysiologically, so imagine that, this is obviously a thought experiment, but imagine you're chasing a cat with a broom. Well, the cat's going to run from the broom, but if you corner the cat with the broom, it will attack you, even though it's just a cat. Well, and the reason for that is that fear will facilitate either freezing or escape. But sometimes fear isn't the right response, and anger will suppress fear. And so one of the tools that we have at our disposal psychologically is anger as an antidote to the terror that would otherwise freeze you. And you can integrate that. That's, if you have some justifiable moral outrage, let's say something really annoys you, or I shouldn't say that, deeply violates your sense of moral propriety. I don't mean trivial things. Then the fact of that forceful response can motivate you to do things, well, it doesn't mean for lecture, but certainly to write. It takes a lot of energy to write, man. You need all
Yeah.
those sources of energy if you're going to
Yeah.
be able to do it. Just
That's right.
even to turn it on yourself, to discipline yourself, you know? It's like I had to grab myself by the scruff of the neck when I was a young guy to sit down, God damn it, and write. You know,
Yeah.
and there's a force that's necessary, to, especially if you're open, because you're all over the place, if you're creative, to get yourself to sit down and focus.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. And, you know, some of that anger, you know, I think Jung talks about this, is that dark side contains a lot of energy. It contains a lot of power. Those 2-year-olds that are kicking and screaming, that's all this kind of force behind it. And when you sort of are ashamed of it and you push that down, you're kind of getting rid of an incredible well of energy that you can use for your creativity, for your work, etc. You can take that energy, like you say, and create discipline out of it, do something creative out of it, support some cause that you really believe in, you know. So that shadow side, when you deny it, only negative things will happen, and it is extremely important for people to first recognize it in themselves, you know, and it's very hard for a lot of people to do that.
Well, I found, like I said earlier, that one of the best ways in there is resentment. You watch
How
yourself
so?
like, well, because if you're resentful, you know, you're feeling like you're being victimized and mistreated. It's like, okay, well, maybe you are. Okay, and you think there's no anger in that resentment, so you're not looking hard enough. If you
No,
watch
right.
your fantasies, for example, if you're resentful and you watch the fantasies that flit through your imagination, like you might not want to attend to them because they can be so brutal.
Right.
But because if someone is oppressing you genuinely and you're not standing up for yourself, then there'll be these compensatory fantasies.
Yeah.
So one day I'll tell you a story about that. So one day I'd been renovating my house and it took a long time. And the neighbors, this house was a complete derelict, and it was a semi-detached, like really a derelict. It hadn't been touched since like 1927. It had gas fittings in the upper floor, needed to be completely gutted. And so we gutted it, and my daughter got sick at exactly the same time, really sick. And so it was stressful and difficult. And the neighbors they called the city on us. They did everything they could to make it difficult, even though they were attached to us and wanted to sell their house. So we
Right.
probably added like $25
Puta madre,
to
culiao.
the value of their house because it was no longer attached to a derelict. And then just as we were finishing, my sister and her husband came to visit, and I was making tea for them, and I closed the cupboard, so it click, and
Ah, de una. Mortal, boludo.
and then that night I couldn't sleep, and I had this. I had really been pushed to my
Ah,
limit.
mira vos, boludo. Qué
I
casualidad.
had
Bueno,
this vision in
entonces.
my mind of burning the damn
No,
place
no.
down.
No, estaba por mandar el audio que mandó Michael, viste, diciendo preguntándome esto, pero no me
You should
importa.
probably go say something.
No es
So I
importante.
took- put on my
Termina
harp
eso.
and I went outside.
Che, y.
6
Qué
in the
bueno,
morning, I just
boludo.
waited for them to come out. They never did, but
No conozco
I
ese
went
chabón,
over
boludo.
on the door and I said, I was making tea for my sister last night, and I closed the cupboard. You didn't happen to bang on the wall because you heard my cupboard closing, did you? And they said, yeah. And I said, okay, look, if you bug me anymore, I'm going to cause you so much trouble you cannot possibly imagine it.
Yeah.
And I meant it. It was like,
Yeah.
because I knew it was brewing in the back of my mind. I said, because I was done. It was like, you want a war? You have no idea what you're getting into.
Yeah.
And so they backed into the kitchen, and like 2 hours later, they came over and said, oh, we're sorry, and we won't do it again. But like what we did was the mistake you talk about. We backtracked continually trying to please them,
No.
and every time they complained, we did what they wanted because we
Yeah.
assumed we were dealing with reasonable people, but we weren't.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the only way to stop them was with a show of force. It was like,
Right.
you want to be malevolent? You want to play that game? It's like, okay, no problem. But
Right.
and things went more smoothly after that. And that's a good example of, paying attention to those fantasies, because I thought I better deal with this straightforwardly. Otherwise, I'm likely to do something stupid.
Right.
That's the other
exactly.
thing you got to watch. If that
Exactly.
builds up inside you,
Exactly.
As a homeowner, some of the most tedious and easily forgotten maintenance tasks are often the most important. Take gutter cleaning. It's one of those out of sight, out of mind chores that can lead to serious issues if neglected. Leaf Filter offers an investment engineered to protect your whole home. Clogged gutters aren't just a nuisance. They can cause extensive repairs costing thousands of dollars and causing major headaches. Leaf Filter's patented technology is designed to take care of everything from start to finish, making the process hassle-free for homeowners. Their professionals will clean out, realign, and seal your existing gutters before installing the Leaf Filter system, ensuring optimal performance from day one. Plus, every installation comes with a free inspection, estimate, and lifetime guarantee. By choosing Leaf Filter, you're not just solving a maintenance problem, you're investing in your home's long-term health and your own peace of mind. Protect your home and never clean out your gutters again with Leaf Filter, America's #1 protection system. Schedule your free inspection and get up to 30% off your entire purchase at leaffilter.com/build. That's a free inspection and up to 30% off at leaffilter.com/build. See representative for warranty details. Promotion is 20% off plus a 10% senior or military discount. One discount per household.
Yeah, and a lot of times I look at people in the public eye who get caught doing something really stupid, like you say, and their first thing will be, well, that wasn't me that did it. I don't know what came over me. That's not who I am. But that is exactly who you are. That is the person who has been carrying this resentment and this kind of inner anger, but not acting upon it. And then suddenly they do something really stupid, like having an affair with a 21-year-old, or they just caught doing something.
Yeah, so I watch people with their children a lot, eh?
Yeah.
And so when my son was a pretty assertive kid and tough, like he had a real will. And, when he was 9 months old and started to crawl around, I taught him what no meant. And what no means is stop doing that or something you don't like will happen to you. That's what no means.
Right.
And so when he was 9 months, he was starting to take books off shelves and get into the plants and so on, because he was starting to crawl around. And so to teach him what no meant, I just grab his leg when he wasn't doing something that I didn't want him to do. And, he would squawk and bitch and complain, and I'd say, no, no, no. And I'd just hold him until he gave up, and sometimes he would cry. And the reason he was crying is because he was frustrated and angry that I was mucking about with him. It's like, fair enough, he wanted to go explore, and, fair enough, kid, you want to explore, but you can't tear out the plant and get dirt all over the rug. And you can't go into the electrical cords, no. And no. And so I had done a lot of behavioral training by that time. And by the time I did that for, say, 6 or 7 days, and soon as if I just said no, he would just stop, and sometimes he would cry. And then the week later, if I said no, he'd just stop. So it took like 2 weeks, eh? And then I knew that if I said no, he would stop. And so then I could let him explore. I could give him a lot of freedom. And then I'd have people come over to my house with their 2-year-old or 3-year-old. And because they had never taught the child what no meant, they never gave, because they didn't want to impose on their freedom, let's say. They couldn't give the child any freedom at all. They had to wander around behind them all the time because they never knew what the child was going to get into. And so then you start to hate your child, right? Because instead of having a bit of free time and just being able to say no to this kid while he's playing around on his own and giving him some freedom, you're just nonstop monitoring this child, and you're mad because you don't have a life. And we had another couple come over, and they had 2 kids that were like 4 and 5, and they were just horrible. We sat down to eat. We wanted to have a conversation, and we put a basket of bread out, and the kids just grabbed the bread and they ate all the centers out of the bread. And the parents were all embarrassed about it, but they didn't do anything to stop it. And, in their minds, they thought, well, aren't we permissive and nice, and we never say no to our children? But they didn't notice that they actually hated their children, because how could you go to someone's house and you want to have a conversation, you just met them, and your children embarrass you to death, and you think you're not going to get resentful about that?
Right.
And you think you're not going to take, and so here's how people would take it out on their kids. So imagine that happens. Now you go home and you're pissed right off, but you're not going to let yourself know that because you're such a nice person. Then your child goes off and draws a picture. Maybe they put a lot of work into it, eh? Then they come running up to show you. And that's a real good time to give them a pat on the head and say, look, isn't that great? But you're pissed off because you were embarrassed. And so you look at it and you think, and that's all you have to do. It's like, that's not really worthy of my attention. You don't have to say anything mean. You just have to not attend in this manner. And then you got your revenge. And you think you won't do that, man. You know nothing about yourself. And you read in the paper sometimes these mothers or fathers, they do something brutal to a child. And I know how that happens. It's like No disciplinary strategies in the house.
Yeah.
The kid
Yeah.
is driving the mother or father crazy. You know, and
Right.
then maybe the mother or father, they're hungover one day and maybe they just broke up with their boyfriend or girlfriend. Maybe they got, hell from their boss who's a tyrant and they haven't stood up to them. And the kid does the wrong thing at exactly the wrong time. And maybe he's actually pretty good at that by then. And it's like, out comes Satan himself.
Yeah.
And all hell breaks loose. It's like, I wouldn't do that. It's like, yeah, there's almost nothing you wouldn't do. You just don't know yourself very well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the ability to set limits and to say no and to tell people that, it's not right for you to bang on my house at this hour and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That takes a little bit of toughness on your part. You have to be kind of willing to put yourself on the line. Maybe that person will get angry and hit you or something, or maybe the war will escalate. But you have to be willing to take that risk. Because if you don't, then you set no limits and who knows what they'll end up doing. But a lot of this permissiveness is people are just basically afraid. They're afraid of any kind of confrontation.
Yeah.
They're afraid of any kind of conflict. And through conflict and confrontation is how you actually grow. It's actually how you develop as a person.
Hey, so here's a cool stat. This is really interesting, man. So there's been some great work on what behavioral markers predict divorce in couples counseling. Really solid work. Okay, so here's one predictor. When the couple is talking in front of a therapist and one of them or the other or both roll their eyes, there's like a 95% chance they're going to be divorced within 6 months. And that's contempt. They've become so disconnected because they don't communicate, because the resentment is built up that they now have contempt for each other. But here's another cool fact from that research. So if you have people track the number of positive and negative interactions with their partner, you can calculate ratios.
No.
And then you can see what the ratio is that lends itself to the successful maintenance of a relationship. And so you might think, well, the more positive interactions, the better. And that's kind of true. So if it falls below 5 positive to 1 negative, the relationship is in danger. But if
Really?
it rises, 5 to 1. And you can kind of see that because, negative events are more memorable and more powerful than positive ones. And so
Right.
you know that if you read YouTube comments,
Yeah.
But if it rises above 11 to 1, the relationship is also in danger. And you can imagine that what you want in a relationship is, well, you want support and love, and you want most of your interactions to be positive. But you want your partner to slap you now and then when you're being stupid.
Right.
And then if they don't, out comes your inner tyrant, right? You're just going to dominate them if they don't push back. And so if you have any sense too, if you have a partner, you want to encourage them to put limits on you. Especially if they're a little more timid than you temperamentally. It's like you don't want to run roughshod over them because they know some things you don't.
Right.
And it's so
right.
cool that it's above 11 to 1. So that means too much positivity is the death knell for a relationship. And you want someone with some spark, right? It's like, well, what if I push you a little bit? Even teasing. You want the person to be able to push back a bit.
And you have to be able to accept it as well, because some people probably in those situations can't stand any kind of criticism. They're so fragile that if the other person pushes back, it kind of escalates into a battle. So real strength comes from the ability in a relationship or any kind of really intimate or otherwise, is the ability to take that kind of criticism, to actually welcome it when people set limits for you and tell you that this kind of behavior is wrong. And then you can evaluate and assess yourself.
Yeah, unless you want to repeat it stupidly forever, right? I mean, that's the alternative in a relationship. Is I don't like conflict. I've been in plenty of conflicts, like plenty, way more than is reasonable. But I don't like them. I meet people now and then. I went to talk to Douglas Murray in New York City about a week ago, and we were talking about conflict. And he said, he doesn't mind a fight. And I've met lots of people like that they like that combativeness. And I don't really. But what I really hate is deferred conflict that escalates. It's like, it's better to get it over with now. And you're a fool if you think that running away from it is going to, like if someone cuts you off in traffic and they're obviously really angry, it's probably better just to get the hell out of there because you're never going to see that person again, and you don't want a situation like that to escalate because
They might have a gun or whatever.
Well, yeah, you just don't know what's up with them. They're really strangers.
Yeah.
But, if you're dealing with someone day in and day out and they're pushing on the top of your head to stop you from growing, which I think Lucy used to do to Linus in the Peanuts cartoons. Yeah,
Right.
they had a dark side, those cartoons, man.
They
comics,
did.
They sure did. Yeah.
Oh, they would be
Yeah.
canceled now, probably.
Yeah, they
Probably
couldn't
be too
exist
dark
now,
now.
I don't think. Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, because a lot of Schultz's characters, Lucy was actually not a likable character at all.
Right,
And she,
right.
and she was really oppressive to Linus, who was a good character. Yeah. A good humor always has an edge. But yeah, that you don't get rid of the negative and part of yourself, especially that aggressive part, by pretending it doesn't exist. That quite the
Right.
contrary.
Concha de su madre.
Right.
When a woman experiences an unplanned pregnancy, she often feels alone and afraid. Too often, her first response is to seek out an abortion because that's what left-leaning institutions have conditioned her to do. But because of the generosity of listeners like you, that search may lead her to a Preborn Network clinic, where, by the grace of God, she'll choose life, not just for her baby, but for herself. Preborn offers God's love and compassion to hurting women and provides a free ultrasound to introduce them to the life growing inside them. This combination helps women to choose life, and it's how Preborn saves 200 babies every single day. Thanks to the Daily Wire's partnership with Preborn, we're able to make our powerful documentary, Choosing Life, available to all on Daily Wire Plus. Join us in thanking Preborn for bringing this important work out from behind our paywall, and consider making a donation today to support their life-saving work. You can sponsor one ultrasound for just $28. If you have the means, you can sponsor Preborn's entire network for a day for $5,000. Make a donation today. Just dial pound 250 and say the keyword baby. That's pound 250 baby. Or go to preborn.com/Jordan. That's preborn.com/Jordan.
Imagine what's possible when learning doesn't get in the way of life. At Capella University, our game-changing FlexPath learning format lets you set your own deadlines so you can learn at a time and pace that works for you. It's an education you can tailor to your schedule. That means you don't have to put your life on hold to pursue your professional goals. Instead, enjoy learning your way and earn your degree without missing a beat. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.
Yeah, I'm sorry, you were going to say something?
I was just going to ask you about your new...
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about working with 50 Cent and the rappers, and I
Okay.
wanted to ask you about your new book, too. So let's start with... So how did this partnership with 50 Cent come about?
Well, the book was very popular with rappers, as I said, because of the nature of the music industry. And he reached out to me. He wanted to meet me because the 48 Laws of Power was sort of his Bible, as he expressed it. So I met him in New York, kind of in the back room of this steakhouse. It was sort of like something straight out of The Godfather. I was kind of the one white guy amongst his whole group there. I was a little bit intimidated, to be honest. I didn't know what to expect because he has this reputation. Ended up, he was really nice, really interesting, actually a very kind of sweet guy, not what you expect. And I just finished writing my book on warfare and strategy, which is kind of my version of Sun Tzu's Art of War, how to strategize in conflicts, sort of like what you're talking about. And he has a very strategic mind, and we kind of had a really nice connection. And I thought, so much in our culture is creating these stupid kind of divisions and walls. Like you're in academia, you only write academic books. You're a popular person, you only write popular books. You come from this community, you come from that community, and you never communicate. And I thought it would be very interesting to write a book coming from two opposite backgrounds. Me, middle-class Jewish boy from Los Angeles, and him from Southside Queens. Something interesting could happen from a collaboration. There's not enough of that in our culture, I believe, because even though our circumstances were very different, our minds were very similar. We were thinking on a similar plane that kind of transcended these sort of superficial differences. So I spent time with him, and I was trying to figure out what is the essence of his power, what makes him such a compelling figure and made him not one of those people in Southside Queens who ended up kind of spiraling downward, ending up in prison. What saved him? And I determined that the quality he had was this kind of fearlessness. And it isn't the kind of fearlessness where you go beating people up or something. It's kind of an inner strength. He had been shot when he was like 20 years old, like 9 bullets right there through a car window, one of the bullets lodged in his mouth. And he survived miraculously. And it gave him this kind of calmness, like, I have nothing to fear. I almost died. Bring it on. I don't really care. And so I observed him in meetings. I observed that kind of calmness and how he could take over a meeting, not by being super aggressive, but just by having this kind of dominant persona. And I thought that there's tremendous power in this fearlessness, not being afraid to be different, not being afraid to have conflict and confrontation, not being afraid of death itself, not being afraid of the reality of your situation, on and on. So the book that we formed together was kind of a meditation on 10 forms of fearlessness. And I found, I thought that I was a relatively fearless person, which in some ways I am. I seem agreeable, but I'm actually in some ways a little bit bold and adventurous. But compared to him, I realized, no, I'm actually riddled with fears. And just being around him and kind of writing the book helped me a lot in my, kind of overcome some of my own limits and some of my own fears. So that's where that book came
it's
out.
nice to have a model like that really close by, right, to contrast yourself with. You can learn a lot from. So do you think that fearlessness that you saw in him, you think part of that was a consequence of that brush with death? How much of that do you think was temperamental too in him?
Well, there's a kind of a reckless fearlessness that a lot of people from the hood have, which doesn't really serve them very well, and it gets them in a lot of trouble, right? He has a very kind of strategic and under control fearlessness.
Hey, I got something cool to tell you about that. So
what?
I was talking to David Buss. Yes, believe him. And he's an evolutionary psychologist, a good one. We were talking about this Machiavellian personality triad, the dark triad that Del Follows, UBC. Yeah, okay. So here's something really interesting. It's the bad boy paradox, they call it, that young, naive women are attracted to those Machiavellian types.
Definitely.
But when they get older and more experienced, they start to be able to see through that. The reason they're attracted to it, as far as I can tell, and I talked about this with Bus to see if I was way off on the wrong track, is that those reckless, fearless people mimic real fearless competence. And young women aren't good at distinguishing between the two. And so they get sucked in by the sort of psychopathic recklessness because they think it's fearless competence.
Right.
And then, of course, the guys who are doing that, they'll prey on that because they're trying to ape competence. But what the women are really after in their heart of hearts, they might be out for an adventure too, because there's that element of it. But they want that fearlessness that does go along with true generosity and competence, and also the ability to keep, real darkness away. So,
well, a lot of those people who display that kind of what you call mimicking fearlessness,
yes,
or whatever,
macho. That's the macho thing.
They're actually hiding the opposite. They're actually very, very riddled with insecurities. They're not, and they kind of create this sort of bravado and this false front, and they go to an extreme to kind of project this machismo, when in fact they're riddled with insecurities, and that's their way of dealing with it. But someone like 50 Cent, he's very comfortable with himself. He knows who he is. He knows where he came from. His mother was a hustler on the streets, so he knew the limits of the game. And I don't know, I think there is maybe a slight genetic component to it. I can't really put my finger on it, why he was able to have this kind of self-control where other people do.
Yeah, well, that dimension, neuroticism, if you're in a rough environment and you're low in neuroticism, that's pretty damn helpful, because imagine that what neuroticism is, unit of psychophysiological upset caused per unit of stress.
Yeah.
And unit of danger, and some people overreact and some people underreact. Sometimes the overreaction saves your life. Sometimes the underreaction gets you killed. So it's not like there's a clear answer. So there's variability there. Some people are much more calm, not volatile. They don't withdraw temperamentally. And that's a more masculine temperament, by the way.
Yeah, I agree.
But if you're raised in a really rough environment and you happen to be emotionally stable, that's the opposite of neurotic, let's say, then you're just not going to be as affected by it, and that can be a real blessing. So, and then I'm also interested in that, you said that you channeled a lot of your shadow, let's say, into creativity. Did you see the same thing happening with 50 Cent?
Oh my God, his music is incredibly aggressive, and to an extent it's kind of violent. And I must admit, it really appeals to me. So when I was writing,
why? That's cool, because it's so interesting that so many rap fans are young white guys.
I know.
Yeah, but that's really psychologically interesting, right? Because if they've been coddled and their ambition has been squelched and everything about them that's aggressive has been shamed out of existence, that's part of that attraction of that dark fantasy, right? And then they see that aggression manifesting itself and in a creative form in rap. It's not surprising that they're going to try to imitate that. It's part of that desire to bring that shadow out of the shadows and into the light.
Well, I wasn't really, I was a little bit different in that I kind of understand, my own anger. I wasn't so much coddled. But what I really enjoyed about his music is it just seemed very real. And kind of the beat kind of catches you up in a primal sense. And kind of the aggressiveness just seems very direct and very refreshing, by the way. And you could tell, I say in my book, Mastery, that by a person's style, by how they write a book, by how they put language together, or the music they create, reveals something very, very deep about their character, about who they are. And so a lot of rap kind of comes across as sort of false, like someone is trying really hard to have that kind of thug persona, and it's not real. But it really smelled authentic with him. And the fact that he'd been shot and nearly died, just kind of added to that aura. But there was something very real about it, very authentic in a culture where so much isn't real. I think that was the deep, deep appeal in a primal sense of 50s music. And when I was writing the war book, I was trying to get myself in a martial mood to write it. I would actually listen to his music to kind of put me in the mood to write some of the chapters. That and Beethoven.
What do you like from what Beethoven do you like? What pumped you up?
Well, when I was a kid, one of the first albums, I was first kind of raised on classical music, then I got into jazz and rock and everything, but I got a collection of his 9 symphonies, and God, there's a kind of an aggression and violence, like to the 5th symphony and the 9th symphony. It just kind of, like they used Clockwork Orange. There's something so overwhelmingly powerful about it, right? It just, you can't.
The choral section in the 9th is like that. It's
and
so
the Ode
powerful.
to Joy.
Yeah, and it's so, isn't that so interesting that the Ode to Joy has that primal aggressive force, and it makes joy. It makes joy is, in the naive sense, it's, well, you're happy. It's like, no, this joy is that integrated, terrible power that you definitely hear in superb music.
Yeah.
And when that choral bit kicks in, it's just overwhelming. It's like a blow and
makes you tingle. It's so exciting, and I've heard it maybe 1,000 times since then, and it still affects me the same way. And now when I'm driving somewhere and I have to get myself in the mood, I'll still put the 9th symphony on. And some of the other ones
it's like encountering the terrible force of good. You think about Moses in the burning bush, or Jacob wrestling with God. It's like, well, why is it a burning bush? Why is it terrifying? Why do you wrestle with God? Why do you get hurt? It's like, well, because good in its full force has this has this integration of power. And it's no wonder it terrifies people, because it just burns everything away in comparison.
Right. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the new book that I'm writing about, which is The Sublime, as I'm talking about, it's a combination of 2 emotions, of both kind of pain and pleasure, of excitement and fear at the same time. So you're confronting something that kind of intimidates you, but is so awesome that you can't, you're just overwhelmed. And the confluence of 2 emotions, opposing emotions at the same time, is very, very powerful for a human being.
Yeah, I've just written a book that I'm going to publish next year that's called An ABC of Childhood Tragedy, and it's a combination of dark humor and beauty. It's
Yeah.
the same. We're experimenting with exactly the same thing. That paradoxical juxtaposition of dark and light emotions. There is something
Yeah.
sublime about that, and something awe-inspiring about that. I guess it's part of bringing what's dark into the light, or subsuming it under the light, maybe. So why why the sublime? What are you pursuing there? And
Well,
what's
the reason, the ultimate in sublime is, to me, so the way I look at it is being a human being and being socialized is a kind of a world. There's a limit, a circle that we have to live inside, certain codes and conventions that we have to abide by, and we all do that. And the codes and conventions for 5th century BC China are not the same as what we have now, but there's still that limit. And what humans are attracted to what lies beyond that limit. It's just part of our nature. It's the first part of it. And when we explore beyond the social limits and codes and things we're supposed to do and ways we're supposed to act, it's deeply exciting and thrilling. There's also that element of fear involved, right?
See, I think that's a better, what would you call it, formulation than Nietzsche's idea of will to power, is the desire to exist on that sublime edge. And that is the border between order and chaos that you're describing, right? You want, and the thing, and that is the source of meaning itself. I mean, that's why I think music is so powerful, is because it plays with predictable forms, but continually adds that level of unpredictability, beautiful. You know how in any kind of music, the simplest music, someone who's good at it, country music, there'll be a key shift or a twang on the string or something that,
or something discordant.
Yes, exactly, and then and integrated within sort of a higher unity, and it's deeply meaningful. It puts you on that edge of the sublime, and we do find the meaning that helps sustain us in life exactly at that place. That's something more deeply real than anything else.
Well, so and sort of the ultimate thing beyond that
Concha de su madre.
is itself, and the word sublime means up to the threshold of a door, or sublimin, limin being the limit.
Right, like subliminal.
And so I've been meaning to write this book for 15 years, and I got distracted. But then about 3 years ago, I nearly died myself. I had a stroke. And I came, just an inch away from dying myself. I was driving my car. And so some of the experience, the near-death experience, and what it kind of taught me and how it sort of remained with me 3 years later, and how I kind of feel it in my bones, and how it's altered how I look at the world and everything around me, is to me the kind of the ultimate sublime experience. So now, unfortunately,